WADR. Promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar and Bamako, 1 p.m. in Abuja. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world at wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink, and here are our top stories. Burkina Faso introduces new mining sovereign fund to support major development investments in the country. Senegal's President Diomaye Faye begins national consultations to build consensus on key issues.
We
discussed the most pressing issue facing the country, the economic situation, financial challenges and security concerns.
Coalitions of CSOs in Nigeria raise concerns over insecurity and demands a peace pact ahead of the election cycle.
Coming barely 7 months before the 2037 general election, it is a critical stress test of INEC's operational readiness.
Fire ravages parts of Bamako's Grand Market ahead of Tabaski. Please stay tuned for the details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Veronique Joy.
Glad to have you join us. We begin in Burkina Faso, where the government has approved a new sovereign mining fund aimed at supporting major investments in the country, known as the Sinian Sugoi Fund. The initiative is expected to finance industrial and infrastructural projects starting from 2027. Imo Edit has the rest of the details.
According to the government, the Sovereign Mining Fund is designed to ensure that revenues from the country's mining sector benefit both current and future generations. Burkina Faso's Economy Minister Abubakar Nakanabo says the fund will be financed through additional revenues generated from mining activities.
Taking
into account a benchmark price level for minerals, any revenue generated above these prices will be paid into this sovereign fund. Naturally, the fund will enable us to finance strategic investments in infrastructure as well as in industry. The fund will be created as a special allocation account, which will make it possible to finance not only industrial projects but also infrastructure projects. It will also help create intergenerational savings.
The new fund will be overseen by a steering committee headed by Prime Minister João Manuel Drago. However, the government has yet to provide details on how the fund will operate or the size of its capital. Officials say the first projects financed under the scheme should begin in 2027. The Sinian Sugi Fund adds to existing mining-related funds already operating in Burkina Faso, including a mining development fund and an environmental fund dedicated to rehabilitating exhausted mining sites.
A report by our correspondent Martin Kaba, voiced by Imo Edit. Here in Senegal, the national consultation, which began yesterday, Thursday, in Dakar with key stakeholders, including former prime ministers, continues today. Chairing the opening session at the presidential palace, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye discussed several issues, including current political atmosphere, the economy, and the security situation. Augustine Colley completes the story.
The first phase of the consultations focused on Senegal's former prime ministers, who were received one after another by President Bassirou Diomaye Faye. Among them was Abdoul Mbaye, the first prime minister during former President Macky Sall's administration.
We discussed the most pressing issue facing the country, the economic situation, financial challenges and security concerns. We also touched on the need to uphold previous commitments by the opposition aimed at reforming Senegal's political system, particularly the electoral code.
His successor, Aminata Touré, also welcomed the initiative. Although some opposition parties are boycotting the dialogue process, she called for the preservation of Senegal's culture of dialogue.
Senegal is a country where dialogue is deeply rooted in our history and culture, and this heritage is something precious that must be preserved. Given the situation in the sub-region and across the world, dialogue remains an essential tool of governance. This is why I believe it is important for all key stakeholders to respond to the President's call.
The consultations are expected to continue until May 31, 2026. President Bassirou Diomaye Faye is expected to engage other segments of society, including civil society organizations, political parties, as well as traditional and religious leaders.
Augustine Coley with that report. In Nigeria, attention is shifting to the country's upcoming off-cycle elections, with stakeholders intensifying calls for stronger preparedness, credible processes, and peaceful participation. Civil society organizations under the European Union Support for Democratic Governance in Nigeria Phase 2 program have raised concerns over the preparedness of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, ahead of the Ekiti governorship poll scheduled for June 20 yet. The coalition warned that gaps in electoral preparedness could affect the credibility of the election if not urgently addressed. WADR Yechenu Sasitu reports.
Addressing a news conference on the pre-election assessment report for the June 20 Ekiti off-cycle governorship election, the coalition called on the Independent National Electoral Commission to improve logistics, strengthen transparency, and ensure effective coordination with stakeholders ahead of the polls. Speaking on behalf of the coalition, Executive Director of the International Press Center, Lanre Arugundade, stressed that timely funding and proper planning were critical to the smooth conduct and success of the electoral process.
Coming barely 7 months before the 2037 general election, it is a critical stress test of INEC's operational readiness. The commitment of security agencies to electoral integrity and interest of voters to actively participate in the electoral process that many already perceive as a foregone conclusion.
Executive Director of the Nigerian Women Trust Fund, Brenda Anugwom, also urged political actors to commit to peace by signing and respecting a peace pact that promotes non-violence and issue-based campaigning.
To political parties and candidates, we recommend that they sign and uphold the peace accord, commit publicly to issue-based campaigning, reject vote buying, intimidation, and the deployment of thugs, and accept credible electoral outcomes.
The group also called on security agencies to maintain neutrality and ensure a safe and secure environment for voters, election officials, and observers throughout the electoral process. The Ekiti off-cycle election is the first governorship election to be governed by the new Electoral Act 2026. For WADR, Yechenu Sasitu in Abuja.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Now, the government of Ghana has assured nationals in South Africa that efforts are being intensified to guarantee their safe return home after the planned evacuation of Ghanaians affected by xenophobic attacks was postponed over operational and legal requirements. An initial batch of about 300 Ghanaians was expected to be evacuated on Thursday out of the more than 800 nationals who have registered with Ghana's High Commission in Pretoria. Meanwhile, the minority in Parliament wants the xenophobic attacks in South Africa and Ghana's evacuation efforts to be tabled before the House for debate on Friday. Nadia Tete reports.
The latest postponement comes as officials from Ghana and South Africa work to streamline procedures ahead of the large-scale evacuation exercise. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the number of Ghanaians seeking evacuation support has risen to more than 800, prompting authorities to expand coordination efforts to ensure the process is carried out safely and in accordance with South African regulations. Government had planned to begin the first phase of the evacuation on Thursday with an initial group of about 300 people. But the ministry says the complexity of the operation, including passenger verification processes, flight clearance arrangements, and coordination among multiple state institutions, has made a short delay unavoidable. The statement added that both Ghanaian and South African authorities have since agreed on enhanced pre-evacuation measures aimed at improving efficiency and accelerating the return process for affected nationals. International relations expert Dr. Ishmael Hlovo has lauded government for its intervention.
We must give some credit to the government for monitoring the situation and always taking decisions when they deem it necessary in favor of Ghanaians. I think largely we can give them a fair score and say that they have done relatively well. Of course, the situation is not totally over, so we will still continue to see how the government responds to this.
Meanwhile, the minority in parliament wants these xenophobic attacks in South Africa and Ghana's evacuation efforts to be tabled before the House for debate on Friday.
My request to the majority leader is if you could get the Minister for Foreign Affairs to appear before this House to brief the representatives of the people on the unfortunate, unfolding and very disturbing situation in South Africa and what government response is, so we can all have the opportunity to intervene.
Government is yet to announce a new date for the evacuation, but has assured Ghanaians in South Africa that every effort is being made to ensure their safe return home and commended them for their patience and cooperation. For WDR, Nadidi Tete, Accra.
The appeal trial of former Guinean Defense Minister Mohamed Janneh has taken a new turn before the Court for the Repression of Economic and Financial Offences. Special Prosecutor Alphonse Charles Wright alleges that the former minister may have received up to 485 million Guinean francs monthly through a payroll number linked to the Supreme Court. Mohamed has denied the allegations and suggested the claims could be part of a set-up against him. The prosecutor says evidence will be presented at the next hearing. Abdullah Hassan tells us more.
During proceedings, Special Prosecutor Alphonse Charles Wright questioned the former minister about the possible existence of a second administrative payroll number outside the one linked to the higher education sector. Mohamed Jan denied having an additional payroll number, but moments later, the prosecution returned with what it described as troubling revelations. According to the prosecutor, a person identified as Mohamed Jan allegedly benefited during the Alpha Conde administration from a payroll number attached to the Supreme Court and received 485 million Guinean francs each month through it. Before the court, Sean Wright announced plans to present the 2021 payroll records at the next hearing, saying the documents will help establish the facts of the case. The claims immediately drew a strong reaction from the accused. Dr. Mohamed Jan described the allegations as a scheme aimed at further implicating him in the ongoing judicial process. However, he declined to comment further on the new accusations. The latest developments come amid already heightened tensions surrounding the trial. The next hearing is expected to be crucial, especially with anticipated presentation of documents promised by the state prosecutor.
Cherno Alpha Ibrahima Baldes report voiced by Abdullah Hassan. In Liberia, authorities have intensified a nationwide campaign against illegal mining and environmental destruction, leading to the arrest of more than 15 Chinese nationals accused of operating without environmental permits. The operation, conducted by the Environmental Protection Agency of Liberia with support from the Liberia National Police, comes amid growing public concern over river pollution, land degradation, and unregulated mining activities across several counties. Recent reports indicate that illegal mining operations have caused severe environmental damage in parts of Liberia, with authorities warning that companies and individuals violating environmental laws will face prosecution and shutdown orders. The latest arrests mark one of Liberia's strongest enforcement actions against illegal foreign mining operations as the country moves to protect natural resources and enforce environmental compliance nationwide. Still in Liberia, the government said it has intensified national Ebola preparedness measures amid renewed outbreaks in parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda. The renewed alert comes more than a decade after the 2014 to 2016 Ebola epidemic devastated Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, killing more than 11,000 people across West Africa, including nearly 5,000 people in Liberia alone, one of the highest national death tolls during the crisis. Against that backdrop, Liberia's health authorities say early preparedness is now considered essential to preventing another national emergency. WADR's Monrovia correspondent Abraham Parker reports.
On Thursday, health authorities convened a high-level national preparedness coordination meeting on the Ebola virus disease, bringing together international partners and health stakeholders to assess Liberia's readiness against any potential importation of the virus. The meeting focused on strengthening interagency coordination, reinforcing surveillance systems, and tightening preventive measures at the border entry points and within local communities. Speaking during the session, National Public Health Institute Interim Director Dr. Sia Wata Kamano said Liberia could not afford complacency despite recording no confirmed Ebola case.
There is no active Ebola outbreak in the country. However, preparedness is not an option. We encourage the public to remain vigilant and report any unusual illness. The public is hereby advised to practice regular hand hygiene, avoid contact with bodily fluids of sick persons, report suspected cases, avoid spreading misinformation.
Meanwhile, World Health Organization country representative to Liberia, Dr. Olusayo Olu, is urging authorities to prioritize monitoring at land and air borders, especially at the Rabat International Airport. The emergency coordination efforts follow a high-level meeting early this week involving Liberian President, the World Health Organization, and representatives of the U.S. Embassy near Monrovia to discuss additional preventive measures and response pathways amid the evolving regional outbreak situation. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide at wadr.org. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Burkina Faso introduces new mining sovereign funds to support major development investments in the country. Senegal's President Diomaye Faye begins national consultations to build consensus on key issues. Coalition of CSOs in Nigeria raised concern over insecurity and demands a peace pact ahead of elections. Ahead in the news, we have fire ravages part of Bamako's Grand Market ahead of the Tobaski. We also have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Thank you for staying with us. In the Gambia, Governor of the Central Bank of the country, Boaseidi, has introduced that the Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, has maintained the monetary policy rate at 14% amid rising inflation risks following a two-day meeting held on May 20th and 21st, 2026. Speaking at the MPC press briefing on Thursday, Saidi said the decision was informed by growing global uncertainties, renewed inflationary pressures, and geopolitical tensions, particularly the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, which has contributed to rising global energy and transport costs. WADR Sang Donald Mendy tells us more.
According to the governor, despite external pressures, the Gambia's economy continues to show resilience with strong performances recorded in tourism, construction, trade and financial services. The central bank projects the economy to grow by 5.7% in 2026, although this marks a slight downward revision due to global economic risks and inflationary pressures. Boasedi is the governor of the Central Bank of the Gambia.
The weaker outlook reflects the adverse impact of geopolitical tensions, elevated energy prices, and increased uncertainty on global trade, investment, and financial conditions.
Governor Sedi disclosed that headline inflation increased to 7.0% in April 2026 from 6.6% in December 2025, driven largely by rising food, transport, and utility costs. He said underlying inflationary pressures have also intensified, prompting the committee to adopt a cautious monetary policy stance.
Global economic activity is expected to moderate in 2026 amid rising geopolitical tensions, renewed inflationary pressures, and persistent policy uncertainty.
The MPC further resolved to maintain the commercial bank's required reserve ratio at 13%, the standing deposit facility rate at 5%, and the standing lending facility rate at 15%. CD reaffirmed the central bank's commitment to restoring inflation to target levels in the medium term, stressing that the bank will continue to closely monitor domestic and global developments and take action when necessary. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Sangdona Mendy reporting from Banjul.
In Mali, fire swept through part of the Grand Market in Bamako on Wednesday evening, destroying several shops and causing significant material damage. Although no deaths were reported during the incident, some days just after the Tobaski or before the Tobaski festival of intense commercial activities in the market, the exact cause of the fire remains unknown. Francis Boniface tells us more.
According to sources on the ground, the fire broke out shortly before 7 p.m. at Bamako's Grand Market. The flames quickly spread to several shops, causing extensive material losses. According to a trader and an eyewitness, traders and residents rushed to salvage goods before emergency services arrived.
The damage is extensive because we lost everything, but we leave it in God's hands. Since Wednesday evening, we have been trying to contain the fire even before emergency services arrived. With support from residents nearby, we managed to limit the spread of the flames. My shop and those of my neighbors were destroyed by the fire.
Civil protection officers later intervened to contain the flames and prevent the fire from spreading to nearby stores. Colonel Adama Jatugui Jara is the regional director of civil protection in Bamako.
We immediately dispatched the first emergency responders from Dravela. Upon arrival, they requested reinforcement and we deployed additional equipment. At the moment, we are operating with 8 fire engines and 2 20,000-litre water tankers for supply support. As you can see, the fire has been brought under control, but we are still monitoring the situation.
The tragedy comes only days before Tabaski, an important sales period for traders. The president of the National Union of Retail Traders, Kabu Fofana, is calling on authorities to support the victims.
Whenever this happens, traders lose hundreds of millions, and over the course of a year, the losses run into billions. This has an impact on the Malian economy. Authorities need to engage with business operators to address the situation.
Investigations are now underway to determine the cause of the fire and assess the full extent of the damage.
That was a report by our Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham, voiced by Francis Boniface.
Politics,
Analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Our guest this afternoon is Mamadou Chor, a Senegalese political analyst who shares his insight into the ongoing national consultations in Senegal led by the presidency. The dialogue that commenced yesterday, May 21st, is the third since the current administration came to power in 2024. Across the country, reactions are mixed by political observers and analysts who question the motive, importance and impact of a new dialogue when previous talks have issued recommendations. More importantly, Chor speaks on the timeline of the discussions as Senegal is just 2 months away from holding local elections.
It is most important to see the recommendation coming from the dialogue which had been held in 2024 and 2025. 2024, we discussed about the justice system, which is problematic in Senegal. And there was a key recommendation. Let me give you one example. For example, the Constitutional Council should be turned into a constitutional court, which is a big move. And for the political system, we are wasting a lot of money when we have a lot of candidates competing the election. So we say it's better to have a single paper where you have all the candidates. And then in so doing, if you were supposed to invest, for example, 20 billion CFA, it can come down to 8 billion CFA. People are waiting for those recommendations to see them turn into law. And the president, in fact, promised he will bring them to the government in the weekly meeting of the ministers and him and his ministers. But we are still waiting to see those recommendations, turn into law. And I think that is what is most important. Look at the current dialogue. The opposition boycotted this dialogue, and that's why I consider that, he could have tried to focus on the recommendation coming from the 2 first dialogue held 2024 and 2025.
Well, can we say that perhaps some of the recommendations from the 2024 and 2025 national consultations were not necessarily his expectation, but at the time said yes to appease the population, but now he wants to review or have a more dynamic consultations now with other stakeholders who were not part of the 2 previous consultations?
In fact, there are some points where there are consensus. People, say that we can go forward and do this and do that. For the other points where they didn't find this kind of consensus, it's up to the president to decide. Yeah, we can understand if he decided to hold the current dialogue, maybe to have a feedback from these former prime ministers. It is a good thing to, hold dialogue, but when you do it and then talking the same issues, in the long run, people will start asking questions, are you up to the task? We are going to the local election, and the time is running. What the ECOWAS say, if you have to have some kind of law talking about this kind of election, you'll have to get them ready 6 months before the election. And the next local election are due to be held at the end of January 2027. So which means we have not enough time. If we continue dialoguing, and then you have to take maybe 1 or 2 months to see what you can have as recommendation, get ready, and turn them into laws, it takes too much time. I think we could have tried to focus on the recommendation coming from the 2 first dialogue, and then try to next year continue for another dialogue.
Mamadou Chor is a Senegalese political analyst. Now for the sports update, let's begin with football, as the Leopards, the national team for the Democratic Republic of Congo, have relocated their World Cup preparation and cancelled a planned training camp due to rising concerns over the Ebola virus. Meanwhile, the Confederation of African Football (CAF) is in full swing with AFCON 2027 qualifying matches. On World Cup preparations, national teams are finalizing their rosters ahead of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Senegal has locked its 26-man roster, while South Africa's Bafana head coach Hugo Broos and Egypt's Hossam Hassan have already revealed their preliminary squad. In athletics, following the recent 24th African Senior Athletics Championship in Accra, long-distance runners are turning their focus to the Cape Town Marathon. That's all for sports news. And we have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudou Diouf for their technical assistance. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X, Instagram, and Facebook at WADR English. I am Veronique Jai. Good afternoon.
We thank you for listening to Newslink in Nigeria on Love FM Abuja and Darling FM Owerri. In the Gambia on Hot FM Banjul, Hilltop FM and Veritas Radio in Serekunda. Thank you for listening on Alternative Youth Radio Lofa County, Liberia, Radio Kegaman in Nimba County, and DCN Radio Riverses County. A big thank you to Radio Baft FM in Sierra Leone for listening, and in Ghana we thank Radio Pad in Damango and Royals FM in Wenchi. Thank you all for listening.